So we are welcoming our guest speaker, Miss Barbara Kaiser.
Thank you, Holly. I appreciate the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. You were a little fuzzy, but I'm hoping everyone can hear me. And I just want to mention it would be best if everybody muted themselves, and also so that I couldn't see, and turned off your videos so that there are no interruptions or concerns with with what I'm going to be showing you. So if you can mute yourselves and turn off your video, that would be great. So just to begin, I just want to say, we're all adjusting to a new normal, and migrant families who were struggling before the pandemic may be having an even harder time. COVID-19 has affected everybody's stress level, including yours, even if you haven't really thought about it, so that you kind of feel you're doing okay, but it's all around us, and there's so many things happening around us right now that we are probably far more stressed and less capable of coping with it than we wish we were. You need to be emotionally strong and available to everyone who counts on you and this organization. And so this session is really intended to help you understand yourself, the children, and their families so that you can better meet their needs and create an environment that allows them to feel safe and thrive. I wanted to begin by showing you a video clip. The address for where this can be accessed is on the bottom. I'm only showing you a piece of it, but I really feel it is a wonderful way to show how important migrant workers' skilled labor really is, and might be something that you might want to share with the folks that you work with.
American agriculture is built on the backs of migrant farm workers, and it's been this way for a long, long time. But the undignified way these human beings are treated, that's something that needs to change. And how we talk about the work they do, and the work that millions of other folks do for that matter, has a huge impact. Avoiding terms like low-skilled or unskilled isn't just about being politically correct. First off, it's just fundamentally wrong. Farm work is hard, and yes, skilled. And I learned that the hard way. Oh God. And language like unskilled not only devalues their labor, but it dehumanizes an entire group of people. It makes it easier for those in power to deny them rights, wages, and the ability to build a life here just like the rest of us. So if you take anything away from this video, let it be this: all work is valuable, no matter what that work is or who's doing it. So the next time you pick up a box of strawberries, toss together a fresh salad, or sink your teeth into some roasted cauliflower, think about the people, the faces, the skillful work that went into bringing you your food.
Migrants, particularly those in lower paid jobs, may be both more affected by and more vulnerable to the spread of COVID-19. But they also play a really important role in the response to COVID-19 because of the work that they do in such critical sectors. So especially those that are working in the chicken factories and close proximity to one another, it can be very, very dangerous. And I have heard that many are not vaccinated because they are afraid to get vaccinated. They don't trust the vaccine, or maybe they are afraid, if they're undocumented, that they don't have the papers. So there are a lot of layers to all of this. And no one is sure when life will return to normal. And I think that uncertainty is a major trigger of stress that can boil over into clinically significant levels of anxiety and trauma. And I know that part of what I'm feeling has a lot to do with the fact that we just don't seem to have a handle on things yet. And in addition to wondering how long this is going to last, the ongoing daily stress and worry of, am I washing my hands enough, cleaning surfaces enough, going out too much? Is everybody wearing a face mask? Are face masks really going to make a difference? Are we keeping everyone safe? This all leaves our brains swimming in the hormone cortisol, which research suggests can disrupt the functions of our prefrontal cortex, the area of our brains responsible for attention span, decision-making, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. And instead, it cues brain fog, apathy, indecisiveness, and mood swings, all of which make it much harder for us or for you to serve the children and their families. So why am I starting with you? I'm going to start with helping you to understand what you might be feeling, even though you're not necessarily aware of it, because you need to understand your stress level and the impact the pandemic and related issues have on you and your ability to make good choices before you can help others. It's important to recognize that stress is really part of life, and it's not always harmful. We all go through stress. If you stop and think about it, when a newborn baby is born and they are hungry and cry, it's stressful, but their needs are then met, and so the stress disappears. And that's considered positive stress. It's mild or brief. Tolerable stress has the potential to harm, but what they have found is that when there is a supportive adult there, and there are relationships that can get you through it, and you find ways to cope, it doesn't lead to toxic stress. But toxic stress is different. Can you think of times when you or the families and children you work with have experienced any or all of these types of stress? Just take a minute to think about that. And where do you fit in? And how stress, what layer of stress do you feel you fall under? For many people, COVID-19 has led to toxic stress. Think about your own experiences and those of the families you work with. The adverse events are intense, frequent, sizable, and prolonged, and the stress response zooms into a higher gear for an extended period of time. And when this happens, it is much easier to turn on that cortisol and much harder to turn it off. And without even thinking about it, it can be harmful and it can lead to trauma. They work simultaneously. Feeling stress is a completely natural response to trauma or adversity because it gears us up to meet those challenges, but sometimes they're harder to meet than others. Toxic stress is a response to trauma, and a trauma is a psychologically distressing event that is outside the range of normal experience and involves a sense of intense fear and helplessness. It can be any event. It doesn't have to be a specific type of event that undermines a person's sense of physical or emotional safety or poses a threat to the safety of those they love. And if you stop to think about it, I doubt there are few in the room and few who are on the internet that don't feel that concern for themselves and those they love. But I just want to point out that there are many types of trauma, and we don't all experience life events in the same way. Some of us are stronger than others, more resilient than others. But if a person feels unsafe, whether it is the result of a single event or repeated events over time, even a result of genetic changes due to historical trauma, it has the same effect. Today's pandemic, COVID-19, is a collective trauma, which may be at the stage of the acute stage for some of us, but it can be more complex and is especially concerning for those who've experienced trauma earlier. So if there are people that you work with, or if you yourself have experienced a trauma before, you are more likely to be vulnerable with COVID-19 and dealing with it. It actually has the potential as well to become an historical trauma. But I want to just talk about it a little bit more as a collective trauma, because the term trauma typically refers to the impact that a traumatic incident has on an individual or a few people. A collective trauma, however, refers to the impact of a traumatic experience that affects and involves entire groups of people, communities, or societies. And I think we can all agree COVID-19 fits into that. It can change the entire fabric of a community. In fact, collective trauma can impact relationships, alter policies and governmental processes, as well as alter the way a society functions and even change its social norms. So if you stop and think about it, COVID-19 really is a collective trauma. But it's important for you to recognize that teachers, counselors, social workers, and therapists who work with the trauma of others also have an increased likelihood of experiencing a change in their own psychological function because of something called secondary trauma or compassion fatigue, which is defined as a state of exhaustion and dysfunction biologically, physiologically, psychologically, and socially. In addition to your own fears and concerns around COVID, you are repeatedly exposed to traumatic stories as well as images in the news, on social media, and called upon to be empathetic, understanding, and giving. People doing the work that you do are people who care about others and their well-being, and often forget about the toll that this can take on your own mental and emotional well-being, maybe even pushing it aside and not accepting that this is also impacting you. Do you recognize any of these symptoms or feelings? Secondary traumatic stress may manifest in a number of symptoms, ranging in a level of severity from headaches, stress eating, or loss of appetite to chronic exhaustion, even paranoia. Reactions may include avoidance of the trauma, feelings of horror, guilt, rage, grief, detachment, or dread, and may possibly even lead to burnout. Additionally, these responses can impact the teacher or counseling relationship. If you're unaware of this stress response, you may implicitly convey a message to the families and the children that you're working with that you're unwilling to hear the details of their trauma or be less likely to ask questions to facilitate dialogue related to the event. This can result in a re-victimization of individuals who you are working without intentionally doing that, who often have limited environments in which telling their story is safe and acceptable and very important to them. Are you finding that if you're reading a book, it's really hard to remember what you read the day before? Are you finding it hard to focus and concentrate? There are many, many ways in which secondary trauma and trauma impacts how you function on a daily basis. When you can identify the skills and strategies that work best for you, when signs of secondary trauma appear, you will have an important insight that will help you to strengthen families and encourage a positive outlook. So although I'm talking a bit about you this morning, if you understand all of this in terms of what you're going through, it will really help you to understand what the families and children you work with are going through. What helps you will probably help them as well. But due to the range of vulnerabilities, such as a higher incidence of poverty, overcrowded housing conditions, and even high concentration in jobs such as working in the chicken factory where physical distancing is difficult, migrants are at much higher risk of COVID-19 than others. And now more than ever, it's important to be aware of the struggles, the concerns, and the fears that you and some of the families and the children you work with are facing. My focus today is really going to be upon the adults, you and the families, because experts say we should be more worried about how social isolation and financial hardship and other factors affecting immigrants are hindering the parents' mental health and in effect their ability to withstand the pressures of parenthood. So if we can support the families and support yourself, you will be much more able to support the children and work with them in a manner in which you can provide them with insights and strengths that they need to get through this in a positive way. Trauma, or a person's experience with actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence via direct exposure, bearing witness in person, indirectly or vicariously, or by learning of a close relative or friend's experience, can keep migrants from flourishing in their new homes. How many of them have lost a loved one due to COVID, or know of someone that has died due to COVID? And how is that impacting their sense of safety? It is not migration alone, but rather traumatic or derailing events that even occurred before, during, or after the dislocation that can lead to their psychological distress. In addition to dealing with the migration experience and COVID, migrants face language issues, residual fear and reluctance to seek help from the authorities or services, intimidation, threats of deportation, and fear of physical or sexual abuse. I don't think, although I live in Canada right now, I am an American citizen, and I watch the American news far more than I watch the Canadian news. And I don't think that minorities and people of color are feeling very comfortable and safe right now in parts of the United States. And many of them may not have the money to rent or buy a place of their own and are living with other families who they may or may not know or resorting to shelters. Many immigrant families and their children may struggle to maintain their cultural values and language, and at the same time experience stress when they are in stark contrast to the cultures, values, languages, and expectations of the US. And family roots that are nurtured by values and experience, history and culture keep families strong and proud and resilient are put into a soil that has elements of discrimination and systemic racism. It affects their sense of self and well-being, which can lead them to question their worth and place. They may even begin to accept the negative societal beliefs and stereotypes about themselves. And it really is all about the relationship that you can develop with them so they can share these concerns with you. Because unless they can talk about them, you can't really support them through it. So try and build that relationship and understand what they are all going through. I think you probably have a far better idea than I do, but I think that sometimes we want to believe that they're okay when maybe they're struggling more than they're willing to let us know. Migration is associated with specific stressors, mainly related to the migratory experience and to the necessary process of acculturation occurring in adapting to any host country. These major stressors have potential consequences in many areas, including their mental health. I don't know if you've noticed that as time goes on and you're working with these families, some are probably doing better, but are others struggling more than they were 5 months ago? This has been going on for 17 months plus. It's a long time for all of us to have to deal with this stress. And the prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder among migrants is higher than it is in the general public. It's about 47%, and refugees have an even harder time. So have you ever thought that when people relocate, they may be feeling a sense of loss and grief, and though the world they escaped from might have put them in danger, or they left because they came to work so that they could earn money and bring it back and support their families, they've left their homeland. Maybe their parents or friends, and right now with COVID, maybe they're very concerned about their safety and well-being. Is it possible that they might feel uncomfortable about these thoughts and think others will judge them, so they keep them to themselves? Disenfranchised grief is something we're not really in touch with. It's a concept that has come up far more now, even among teachers during lockdown, when they really missed their jobs. They missed the children. They were very concerned about the safety and well-being of the children. It is important for you to help those you work with to uncover these feelings, acknowledge them, and help them to find a way to accept them. It's okay to feel that you miss your family or you miss your home country, so that they don't sort of carry that along and make themselves feel even harder or find it more difficult. Trauma can cause traumatic stress responses in family members with consequences that ripple through their relationships with each other and can impede optimal family functioning. Sometimes if you have a married couple, maybe they're finding it harder to get along. Maybe there are issues that wouldn't have occurred if they weren't dealing with COVID on top of everything else. And without support, parents may not be able to process their trauma or their feelings. Some factors, such as a child's age or the family's culture or ethnicity, often influences how the family copes and recovers from a traumatic event. Adjusting to America with the present complication may be smooth for some, but for others, the stress and burden cause them to feel alone, overwhelmed, and less able to maintain vital family functions. Do you know which families are doing well and which families really need some additional support? When working with families and children who have experienced trauma, a continuous nurturing and culturally sensitive relationship between you and them that fosters psychological safety is so essential. The experience of psychological safety reduces the need to be engaged in constant vigilance enables people to feel safe and to express their needs and emotions, which can help them to find their way in their new surroundings. Are you finding constant vigilance? Are you finding that they're always looking around, that they are very concerned? You can help them to feel confident to explore possibilities that are related to the abilities and qualifications that they arrived with. The children of migrants are having to deal with their own issues, hearing or observing racist acts of violence against themselves, their parents, siblings, or extended family. Some are living in an atmosphere pervaded by overwhelming fear and stress. Some are even having their possessions destroyed when they're at school, and being locked in or out. They're being forced to keep silent sometimes and observing injuries in the aftermath of an assault. I'm not sure exactly what's happening in Arizona, but the world has become pretty cruel. And often it's the young children, the adolescents, whose English may be better than their parents, who are taking the responsibility to call police or ambulance or other sources for help. Research has shown that even children who appear to be okay may have delayed reactions because the impact does not appear immediately. And I just wanted to show you this graphic so that you could see how trauma impacts children in every possible way. As reflected in the Adverse Childhood Effects Study, trauma and neglect interfere with the child's capacity to successfully engage in learning, whether it's an infant learning how to feed and sleep, a toddler learning how to explore the world through play, a child learning to read and relate to peers, or an older adolescent dealing with the demands of school and peer acceptance. And for those kids who are going through puberty, it's getting even harder. So all of this is cumulative. And trauma sounds like a big word, but it isn't such a big word. It is something that is dealing with how our brains are functioning. And we need to really recognize that the stress has become for many overwhelming and is turning into a traumatic response. And when threat appears, the brain instantly takes charge. It perceives the threat. It judges its seriousness. It decides how to respond and then sets the stress system in motion, which once again, as I mentioned, the hormone cortisol starts to flood the brain. And when the threat recedes, cortisol levels and other systems return to normal. But if the threat continues, cortisol levels remain high. And since this is a continued threat, since it's been 17 months, our cortisol levels, the families you work with, their cortisol levels are all really high. And if you look at what's happening in the States and the world around us and how much violence and how unsettling things have become, I truly believe it's because people's cortisol level is just so high that our brains are not managing it well. And the focus of your interactions always need to focus on reducing the level of cortisol so that the adults can take care of their children and the children can learn to feel safe. So it's about helping them to feel safe, helping them to deal with what they are feeling and how you can help them feel better about the situation. If their cortisol levels remain high, it will impact your ability to relate to them and the relationship that you can form. Due to the increased level of cortisol, you may find that you and the families, and especially the children, might be easily triggered or set off. Take a minute to look at this list. Those of you that are in the big room, are you finding that maybe the families you're working with are struggling and the children are struggling with self-regulation? Are they becoming easily overwhelmed and giving up on a small task? Are they behaving in ways that you think are unpredictable, volatile? Are they being defensive when they really shouldn't be? Are they sort of interpreting what you're saying in a defensive manner? And sometimes they might actually become spacey or detached or distanced. And how are they more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors, especially the adolescents? And think of yourself as well. Are any of these things true for you or your family? and how you're dealing with COVID and the stress and the trauma that it might be putting you through. It's important to understand some of the common reactions to trauma in order to not only understand yourself, but also to be able to understand the behavior of your students and the adults that you are working with. So take a look at this and see that how different ages, children, adolescents, adults, and older adults, so that if your parents, your grandparents, how are they dealing with this? And how is their response impacting how you're feeling? So take a minute, just look at this. Think about the age group you work with. Think about your own family. How much of this can you relate to? It's really, really hard. And I think when I was talking to the folks before we began, they were saying that, people are dealing really well, that you're doing fine, that you feel safe, you're vaccinated and you feel safe. But I think it goes beyond that. And it's important to recognize it, not to dwell on it, but to recognize it so that you can work through it. The school closures and distance learning measures put in place to slow the spread of COVID-19 put children of migrants at an even more disadvantaged level in several ways. Their parents tend to have had fewer resources to help them in their homework. Many children of migrants don't speak English at home. They may not have had access to a computer or an internet connection, or even a quiet place for study. And these factors may have put them behind. And as a result, they may feel inadequate and resort to behavior at school that will hide their sense of inadequacy so that it's unfounded. And we all know the best way to hide the fact that a child, you might not know the answer, is to engage in inappropriate behavior and have the teacher either call on someone else, send you out of the room, so that we have to really understand and support them and give them the additional information or opportunities that they may need to feel that they can cope and respond to the learning requirements just as well as others. It's all about, as I mentioned, and I can't mention relationships enough, between you and the families, teachers and students. Interaction is no exception. Student engagement is not a binary skill. Students need to feel connected, safe, and welcomed. They need to have a choice, a voice, and agency in their learning, and know there is a connection between what they are learning to the real world. Successful learning environments are all about the choices teachers make. So it's very important to question your methods if you're teaching and working with these kids, and try new approaches for learners who aren't ready yet. Start with what they know, not with what they don't know. And the best way to build these relationships with your students is to know their dreams, their needs and abilities, and then base their experiences in your classroom around this information. We all feel so pressured to begin with the academics and forget about the person. Remember, if the person isn't in the room, they're not learning the academics. If you stop to think about it, trauma-informed practice is based upon Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First, you need to be sure that the family's psychological needs are met: food, housing, clothing. Then your job is to help them feel safe and find their place in their new surroundings so that they can believe in themselves again and reach their goals. And finally, it's important to understand how COVID has exacerbated the difficulties they may have experienced. A trauma-informed approach for school and community can help reduce or prevent a traumatic response, build children's confidence, and help build the family's confidence. Even when people realize that you are there to help, that it will be difficult. There will still be many difficult moments. Your response is key and can make or break the relationship you've worked so hard to develop. When someone says or does something you perceive as irrational, try not to judge or discount their feelings. Avoid overreacting. It's so important for you to remain calm, rational, and professional. You've got to dig deep. Pay attention to them. Watch and listen carefully for the person's real message. And one thing we need to remember to do is to respect personal space. Allowing personal space tends to decrease a person's anxiety and can help you prevent acting out behavior. So be very aware of when you might be too close or too far. When you get too close, people's shoulders will go up and their eyes might even look a bit, uncomfortable. And when you're too far, you're not connecting. Find that personal space so that you really know that they are listening, that they are hearing, and that you're truly communicating. And it's also important to remember that they are watching, because language is an issue. Your nonverbal communication becomes even more important. So keep your tone of voice and body language as neutral as you can, and it will help to diffuse any situation. While you can't control another person's behavior, you can control your response. You, your students, and the families all need to focus on building resilience, because you can't do any of this unless you become resilient. The instructions on an airplane are very much in sync with what you have to do when working with children and families who've experienced trauma. Take care of yourself before you can take care of others. Chances are that you are distinctly aware of your role to support the families and help them to become more resilient. But you also need to recognize the importance of celebrating and developing your own resilience, because you can't develop their resilience unless you really understand what it is and develop your own. Think of it as you're the pitcher and they're the cups, so that you can support them and fill their cups. You need to be as resilient as you possibly can. You will probably, I think I might have skipped. Resilience is about survival and growth. It's about bouncing back from a terrible event and seeing it as an opportunity to learn new skills. It's about having the strength to cope, responding effectively to challenges, and being determined to see things through to the end. Being mentally strong and maintaining a sense of well-being, even when faced with adversity. And that's why it's all so important. Resilience enables you to have a sense of purpose and goals, be flexible and adaptable, recognize and manage your emotions, form and maintain positive, mutually respectful relationships, understand the feelings of others, be able to solve problems and make informed decisions, and have a sense of independence and self-worth. How important is all this to you and what you're doing and your personal life, and to the migrants and the families that you're working with? Your ability to bounce back depends on the quality of the environment and the psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources available to you and to the families. Paradoxically, adversity that isn't overwhelming can protect us from stress later on. It's kind of like a runner running a marathon. You need these mini encounters with stress in order to develop the capacity to cope. And if the stress is neither too large or too small, it will prepare you to manage more difficult stress and to run a marathon, for example, later on. So the more you can cope with stress, the stronger you become. Needless to say, everyone has faced new challenges over these 17 months. But think about what you have learned about yourself and others. Resilience during COVID has taught us how to reach friends and loved ones through a new means, provide virtual learning like this, and connection opportunities with our colleagues, students, and their families, and find new ways to work together so that we can turn feelings of isolation into a sense of purpose. Oops, this skipped ahead. I apologize. Let me go back. Okay, I'm sorry. It skipped ahead. How helpful is it for you to think about what you have learned instead of what you have lost? Would it be helpful to ask your students, the families, what have you learned through this? How have you become stronger? Post-traumatic growth is something that's come up recently, and it's sometimes considered synonymous with resilience, but it's becoming more resilient as a result of a struggle with trauma, can be an example of post-traumatic growth. But post-traumatic growth is different from resilience. Resiliency is the personal attribute or ability to bounce back. But post-traumatic growth, on the other hand, refers to when someone has experienced a trauma and ultimately finds a sense of personal growth. Post-traumatic growth refers to positive changes experienced as the result of adversity in a life or life-altering crisis like this one. When people develop new understandings of themselves, the world they live in, and how to relate to other people, the kind of future they might have, and a better understanding of how to live life, it's a process that takes a lot of time, energy, and personal strength. And in order to be able to recognize that they are stronger from the experience, have improved their coping mechanisms, and have developed stronger social ties and sense of belonging, it often means that they have a greater appreciation for life and what they have instead of what they've lost. So think about it and think how important that is for how we're going to deal and respond to the world as it is today. Ask yourself these questions. Are you resilient? Are you enthusiastic about life and work? Can you cope with difficult situations? Is there a person in your life you can turn to in difficult times? Do you have the ability to see the future and go for it? Do you have a positive attitude? Are you determined? You're going to make this work no matter what. You're going to stick with it till you've solved it. And do you see the options and adapt effectively to meet and overcome challenges? These are really good questions you need to ask yourself, and maybe you need to ask the families and the students that you work with, because these are important things that will help, factors that will help a person develop resilience. Resilience is shaped throughout life by the accumulation of experiences, both good and bad, and the continuing development of adaptive coping skills connected to those experiences. And researchers, what they've done is they've created 4 phases of resilience. You don't just automatically become resilient. It's a process. The first phase is survival, and it's the first and immediate reaction. But most of us adapt and begin to take on some responsibility, feel less victimized, accept the situation, and learn new skills that's going to help us move through adversity more easily in the future. And this leads to recovery, when we develop new habits and skills, and finally growth, which occurs when you can see how others feel and begin to believe that things will get better. So just to kind of explain these a little bit better and think about where you feel you're at. And one of the things I've noticed personally is that I might be at the survival stage one day and the growth stage another day. I move back and forth all the time because it just keeps changing. And I have different things that I need to adapt to. Different events happen in my life, or different events happen in the world that all of a sudden push me back or move me forward. When in the survival mode, our cortisol levels are rising and we are not able to make those choices. The amygdala is activated and our response is limited to fight, flight, or freeze. That's all the amygdala allows us to do. And if we remain in this phase, it can actually be destructive. If our cortisol levels remain high, we're not able to respond thoughtfully to a critical situation or to another person's needs. In this phase, we're anxious, stressed, and often resigned to failure, maybe having difficulty sleeping, maybe having difficulty focusing, all the things that were on the previous slide. Both you and your clients should look for opportunities to exercise, walk more, hit the gym or a dance floor, connect with others and ask for help. Talk about your feelings with people you trust, such as loved ones, friends, and support groups. Or sometimes recognize that you might need the help of a mental health professional. It's okay. Use your creative expression. Paint, cook, start a journal, do woodworking, and learn to say no and set limits, which I'm sure for you, as for me, is very difficult sometimes. Celebrate your work. Identify how you have helped others and be proud of the positive outcomes you facilitated. And plan for coping. Identify the skills and strategies that work best for you when signs of secondhand trauma appear. And this can really help the families as well. When we are stressed, we often feel as if we are out of control of our lives, our finances, our family work, our environments, and this can leave us feeling paralyzed and helpless to change things. When we feel helpless, we feel stressed, so it just builds upon each other. Know your sources of stress and frustration. It can be tricky enough to manage stressors when we know about them, But many of us don't even fully realize what those sources of stress are because they're not always apparent. And sometimes the most negative source of stress can be ourselves. Keep track of times that you feel more stressed. And when you look at these events objectively, you might begin to see a pattern, or you might see things that surprise you. And identify the unhealthy ways you currently cope with stress and choose some healthier ways. Take responsibility and take positive action. It's important to remember that there are as many ways to handle stress as there are people. So what works for one person may not work for you. You have to find the stress management strategies that best fit your personality, lifestyle, and interests. I know for me, to be honest with you, the first 12 months of COVID, I gained a lot of weight. I have lost most of it, but I still sometimes rely on jelly beans and brownies. So think about some of those unhealthy ways and how you can find healthier ways. Think about what kinds of events have been most stressful for you, how these events have affected you. Have you found it helpful to think about important people in your life when you're distressed? Who have you reached out to? We need others when this happens. What have you learned about yourself? Has it been helpful for you to assist someone else? Are you finding that your work actually helps you deal with the stress in your life because you are helping others, or is it making you feel more stressed? Have you been able to overcome obstacles? And if so, how? And pat yourself on the back. You're getting there. And what has helped make you feel more hopeful about the future? These are all things that will help you get through this phase so that you can reach the recovery phase. And as you start to feel stronger, you become capable of opening up to learning new skills that will help you to move through adversity more easily in the future. Develop new, healthier habits and focus on the reality of this situation and not the injustice of why me. When you are in the growth phase, you are realistic about the situation. You take responsibility for your actions. You're more self-aware. You're capable of perspective taking and developing more in-depth relationships, all of which, as I have mentioned repeatedly, are so important when facing adversity. So you might be there, and if you slip back, that's okay. Just remember how you got there, what you need to do, because there are many factors that contribute to the development of a person's resilience. And in recent years, thinking about resilience has shifted. It's now believed that although your personality plays a role in promoting resilience, your environment is just as crucial, sometimes even more so, because it influences whether or not your own resources will emerge. And when you think about the families that you work with, is being in a strange country, doing the work that they do, making it harder for them to develop their resilience, or is it supporting their resilience? Close relationships with family and friends and belonging to support groups are very important. A clear sense of self-identity, personal, cultural, and spiritual. So how can you help the families develop that? A sense of self-efficacy, the capacity to make realistic plans and take steps to carry them out. And a sense of hopefulness, finding positive meaning in your life despite difficult or traumatic events that are all important steps to building your resilience. Starting to see yourself as resilience rather than as a victim will help you to find healthy ways and the families that you work with to cope with stress, build confidence in their strengths and abilities, and develop a sense of being in control. Once again, Bronfenbrenner's ecological perspective pops up, wherein consideration is given to the reciprocal interactions between human development and the multiple environments in which it occurs. And this is even more important for the migrant families that you work with. Each of these systems influences your psychological development and their psychological development in its own way. The systems are so intricately intertwined that one affects all the others and forms a person's resilience. Another important thing to think about, and for those of you that are at home and doing this virtually, write down 3 words that describe who you are. Not how others see you, but how you see yourself. And for those of you in the big room, think about it. How would you describe yourself? Who are you? And what would this be a helpful exercise to do with families or your students. And I wish I was there to discuss this a bit further and see how you were responding, because it is so important to really have a sense of self-identity. In my case, I guess the way I look at myself is I'm a woman, I'm a grand.
Barbara, can you hear me? I think we lost you. We lost the connection. Bear with us. I think she's trying to connect again. Welcome back, Barbara.
I don't know what happened. I apologize. I don't know what happened. So allow me to continue. I don't know what happened. Okay. So we also need to think about a positive sense of self. Your belief in your ability to succeed is key, and it requires initiative, the ability to make choices and decisions and act upon them. You need to have grit and perseverance, which means the ability to stick to and accomplish long-term goals, even in the face of setbacks. How tenacious are you? Are you determined to meet your goals? How persistent are you? Do you keep trying in spite of obstacles, difficulties, or discouragement? Do you and the families that you work with believe in your own ability to develop through effort and tenacity? It's like a muscle that gets stronger with use. People with a growth mindset welcome challenges and see mistakes as opportunities to learn, whereas people with a fixed mindset believe their intelligence is fixed at birth and fear challenges and give up easily. Where do the families that you work with stand? How can you help them to develop some of these characteristics? It's important for you and the children and the families to recognize what they are good at and how their skills can help them cope with the situations they may be facing. By recognizing and supporting the skills you employ to survive in your everyday life, you can identify areas of competence, control, and power that will increase your ability to use and to build new skills and self-esteem that will bolster your resilience. And so can the families. So help them develop and identify those areas of competence and control so that they can also build their resilience. And when we focus on our failures, we lose our sense of self and our self-efficacy, hopefulness, and confidence. A positive attitude about what you can do as opposed to what you cannot do leads to hopefulness, which is so important right now. Think about what changes you make in your life to help you become more resilient, and what changes you might help the people that you work with make in their lives to help them become more resilient. Sometimes if you take a deep breath and think about something or someplace you love, it helps you to regain control and can lead to a positive attitude. That might sound silly, but I know it works. We often hang on to negative thoughts and feelings, which make us feel worse and hold us back from achieving our goals. So when I mentioned earlier that maybe some of the sources of stress may be you, or maybe the families themselves. Are they doing that? Are they hanging on to those negative thoughts instead of looking at what they've learned and how to be more positive? We need to let them go. Let them float away like a balloon. We need to invite gratitude. Think about the good things in our lives. What do you have to be grateful for? What do they have to be grateful for? And then help them to find ways to do something that gives them joy, and you as well. Why do we always put other things first and then feel frustrated or angry when we can't do or don't do what we like to do? When you are resilient and when families are resilient, they have personal values that guide their decision making. They place a high value on, you place a high value on professional development and can actively seek it out. You can begin to mentor others. You can take charge and solve problems, and so can their families. Stay focused on your families and students and their learning. Do whatever it takes to help others be successful. Have friends and colleagues who support your work emotionally and intellectually. And you're not wedded to one best way of teaching. You become more flexible because you are willing and anxious to try new things as opposed to sticking to what may have worked a week ago and isn't working now. And you know when to get involved and when to let go, which can be very hard when working with migrant families who may be struggling. On a more positive note, you need to remember that the trauma that the families you are working with is not the only thing that defines them. They have skills, qualifications, ideas, and connections they bring with them. They most likely would not have succeeded in getting to the US if they were not strong physically and emotionally and determined. Developing resilience is a personal journey. Make connections. Good relationships with close family members, friends, and others are so important. Accepting help and support from those who care about you and will listen to you strengthens your resilience. So help them find others, or you be that person that listens. Avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. Keep things in perspective. You can't change the fact that highly stressful events happen, but you can change how you interpret and respond to these events. Accept that change is part of living. Change can be a good thing. Accepting circumstances that cannot be changed can help you focus on circumstances that you can alter and move towards your goals. What's one thing you know you can accomplish today that will help you move in the direction you want to go? And maybe that's a very useful, helpful thing to ask the families to do as well. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. People often learn something about themselves and may find that they've grown in some respect as a result of their struggles. Nurture a positive view of yourself. Develop confidence in your ability to solve problems and trust your instincts. And try as hard as you can to maintain a hopeful outlook, because an optimistic outlook enables you to expect that good things will happen. Take care of yourself. Pay attention to your own needs and feelings. Being resilient doesn't mean that you go through life without experiencing stress or pain. People feel grief and sadness all the time, and a range of other emotions after adversity and loss. The road to resilience lies in working through the emotions and effects of stress and painful events. So I hope this has been helpful for you to understand yourself a bit more and for you to be able to support and help the families and the children understand themselves a bit more. And I wanted to end it with this slide because I found this on the internet and I thought it was so inspiring that a new graduate from the UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego, wanted to pose for her graduation photo with her parents in the fields that they worked so hard in so that they could support her education. And I think to begin with the video I did and to end with this just gives me so much hope in what you do and so much hope in how well the people that you work with, their intentions and what they can do for themselves and for their families. Because life is not about how fast you run or how you climb, how high you climb. It's about how well you really bounce. So thank you very much. I really do hope this has been helpful.